Salutare fraților și bine ați venit la un nou episod. Astăzi vom reacționa la un spoiler din joc, la un documentar care se numește Tiberian The Forgotten, care se numește The Mutants și care se numește Asidul Mutanților pe românește. Dacă vreți să mă susțin, nu uitați să dați un like și să vă abonați la canalul meu de YouTube. Să începem. Asta este Forgotten, Tiberian Mutants, Command and Conquer lore. Să începem.
When Tiberium first came to Earth, it was regarded as a scientific anomaly, a valuable resource, its potential untapped and unknown. As time passed, the crystal spread over the planet, and during the First Tiberium War, its more sinister effects were revealed. Welcome back, Commander. The mutagenic properties of Tiberium were first observed in the transformation of terrestrial flora, the conversion of plant life into blossom trees, a means of Tiberium self-propagation. Then the deaths started. Exposure to humans and other animals caused Tiberium toxemia, characterized by hemorrhaging and later crystallization of the skin and organs, and the systematic failure of bodily functions. In some instances of extreme exposure, the victim's genetic code may suffer a rapid chain collapse, resulting in a rampant crude biomass, a visceroid, the most basal of Tiberium lifeforms. During the post-war period, as the global spread of Tiberium reached critical levels, more sophisticated Tiberium-based life began to emerge. In rare cases, those who survived the initial infection would undergo a more controlled and directed mutation. These mutant humans were made stronger, more resilient than uninfected people, their altered biology allowing them to survive in the Tiberium-consumed wastelands. Like all Tiberium-based life, an injured mutant would rapidly regenerate injuries under direct Tiberium exposure. This was not a benevolent curse. Over time, the crystal would continue to twist and distort its host beyond earthly recognition. Once infected, the process is irreversible. Tiberium mutation is a death sentence, just not an overly expeditious one. Merely victims of circumstance, these mutants were cast out from human society for fear of further contamination amongst the healthy populace. They found sanctuary in their own company, forming nomadic tribes in densely irradiated Tiberium zones, often below the blasted surface, where they could live without human interference. Adapting to these barren, hostile zones, they were known as a fierce warrior people, a legitimate threat even to the highly trained GDI soldiers and the fanatical zealots of Nod. They didn't manufacture much weaponry themselves, instead scavenging from old battlefields, their skills and innate strengths making up for their typically outdated weapons. Collectively, the Tiberium tribes of Earth called themselves the Forgotten. These areas also played host to other mutated lifeforms. Tiberium fiends have a caniform appearance, but commonly grew to the size of a large horse. Clusters of pure Tiberium protrude from its back, shards of which it could launch as projectiles. Aggressive and highly territorial. Yet remarkably intelligent, Tib fiends have been known to respond well to perceived acts of kindness, allowing the Forgotten to train and even domesticate these beasts. The Forgotten held a deep resentment for humanity, matching humanity's fear for the mutants. They held love neither for GDI or not, feeling betrayed and neglected by the supranational states. GDI attempted outreach efforts to the mutant populations around the end of the 2020s, but it was too little too late, and the Brotherhood had always excelled in propaganda.
The GDI battalion rolled into an undefended mutant camp today, killing all but a few of the long-suffering Forgotten who lived there.
We consider the Forgotten to be our allies, and they must trust us when we say this was a Brotherhood trick.
Never say trust us to a mutant.
Despite their fascination with Tiberium, Nod regarded the mutants with disgust. Using Project Reactionez from the First War as a basis, Nod used captive mutants as guinea pigs in their divination experiments. At this time, the Forgotten were led by a mutant named Tratos, a venerable warrior and researcher, and the earliest known keeper of the alien data matrix, the Tacitus. Given its clear relation to Tiberium, the Forgotten protected and studied it, in the hopes of finding a way to reverse their mutations. It was for this end that Tratos was persuaded to work with Nod in translating the Tacitus, aided by the artificial lifeform Cabal. He was deceived, learning too late that Cain yet lived and exactly what he was planning. Weighed down by guilt, his condition rapidly deteriorated, suffering pentosi or visions of the forthcoming Armageddon he'd unleashed.
Stay alert, people. Just because the lights are off doesn't mean nobody's home.
You're bad for a blunt.
Mutant shiner.
My name's Umagon and you better use it. Unless you want your head cut off.
Don't.
Umagon, a Forgotten Commando. After the outbreak of the Second Tiberian War, she sought an alliance with GDI, offering the use of Forgotten warriors like the Ghost Stalker, in return for assistance in rescuing Tratos.
Why should I trust you?
Unlike you blunts, the Forgotten are a people of honor.
The successful joint operations throughout the conflict improved relations between the two, but it was not to last. In his own bid for power, Cabal plans to acquire the Tacitus for himself.
This is Tratos. He is a mutant and an enemy of Nod. He is the only sentient other than myself that can translate the Tacitus. Kill him.
Although GDI were able to put down Cabal's insurrection, the damage to the Forgotten's trust had already been done. Tratos had been killed under GDI protection, and the Forgotten could not ignore that failing. The alliance that had been built up in Tib War II swiftly dissolved, the Forgotten becoming increasingly distrustful of outsiders than before, until, in 2037, they vanished. In what has become known as the Mutant Exodus, the Forgotten severed all ties to humanity, retreating deep into Tiberium red zones in a self-imposed exile. In a gesture of good faith, GDI began deploying habitat modules at the edges of red zones in 2042, offering shelter from the all-too-common ion storms. On occasion, the habitat showed signs of use, but actual sightings of mutants were vanishingly rare. The exact whereabouts of the Forgotten tribes are unknown.
Commander, you're not gonna believe this. GDI just activated all their ion cannons in the southern hemisphere. I thought they were gonna wipe us off the map in Australia. But they're firing something in space. Check it out.
Then, in 2047, the Skrin came.
What the hell's going on?
The Third Tiberian War was already underway when the invaders arrived. They immediately began mining operations, constructing 19 threshold towers in the most afflicted red zones. GDI launched attacks on the thresholds, but this was in Forgotten territory. It's hard to imagine they wouldn't also have intervened. Of course, it's their Earth too. The Skrin are Tiberium-based lifeforms, though perhaps not originally. They cannot survive without a constant supply of Tiberium radiation, at this stage requiring planetary-scale harvesting to sustain themselves. The organic parts of the Skrin continue to be mutated by Tiberium exposure even in their advanced state of dependence. This implies that Tiberium is not native to their underlying biology. Sound familiar? Nod has once again gone quiet, and there's no way of knowing if a second invasion is imminent. In the tenuous peacetime, GDI has resumed their efforts to reclaim land overrun by Tiberium using their harmonic resonance technology. Given enough time, they could feasibly reclaim the entire planet, thus raising a problem for the aptly named Forgotten. It's been 15 years since last they were seen, but for the occasional marauder, if they are on the same path of directed mutation as the Skrin, they may already have become dependent on Tiberium to survive. The wind-blasted red zones, like portals to a toxic alien planet, have become sanctuary to the Forgotten. It has been GDI's mission since 1995 to contain the Tiberium outbreak and to reclaim and restore the Earth. This goal may no longer be possible. One day, GDI will be forced to confront their former allies and decide the fate of the planet, if it could be shared between both carbon-based and Tiberium-based beings. The Forgotten are bound by the crystal. It distorts as much as it rejuvenates, and though a blight on humanity and the greatest ecological disaster in history, it remains the most valuable resource on Earth. This is the great curse of Tiberium, like the spice of Arrakis. The Earth can never be free of it. My name is Stefan. Thank you so much for watching.